So how's SBC 12 been for everybody? Good? A smattering of applause. I know these things can be a whirlwind. This is my second one, and I appreciate you guys hanging in there and getting up early to stick around for some of the last sessions. Louder? Yep. How's that, better? Okay. So today we're going to talk about reducing organizational risk through effective information management, which is a little bit of a mouthful, but hopefully by the end we'll have a little more clarity about what we're talking about. So a little bit about myself first. My name's Paul Olenek, and I'm a principal consultant at a company called Arcovis, which is a small SI in New York City, where we do a lot of SharePoint and enterprise search projects. And I am largely technical on those projects, but being a consultant, I get a view into a lot of different people's organizations. So we're not going to go that technical really at all today, but we're going to take a lot of the experience that I've had applying some of these things and talk about how to sort of get them through all the gridlock of getting these projects done. So I'm a Microsoft SharePoint MVP and a Microsoft VTSP. And those of you who've been around Microsoft know that we like to put a lot of little letters and stuff after our name. So MVP means that I do a lot of this kind of thing. So I contribute to books, and I write articles and talk and sort of share with the community. And then they recognize some of those people by giving this award. Really the best thing about it is that I get more access to information that I can share with my customers and with you guys. VTSP is a program that actually not a lot of people know about, even within Microsoft, where Microsoft will extend their technical team to their partners. So, for instance, if they have technical pre-sales meetings and they don't have the in-house expertise or they're just don't have the resources at the time, they can bring somebody like me and sit down and do an ADS with a customer. And again, in turn, I get a lot of information, extra information that I can use in my projects. Excuse me. I mentioned I do some writing. The sort of biggest, most recent book I contributed to is this Microsoft SharePoint 2010 Enterprise Architect's Guidebook. And we'll try to figure out a way to give this away towards the end. Maybe do like a leg wrestling competition or something. I also moderate a show called SharePoint Shop Talk, which is sort of like a live version of the MSDN forums, where you can kind of join this webinar, and if you're having problems with SharePoint, ask a panel of experts about your problem, and we'll try to answer it. And usually, if we can't, we can answer it by the following week. And then we'll often do some presentations and staged content as well. So feel free to look that up and join us. And then I have a blog as well that you can look at. That's largely technical. So just a quick survey so I kind of know who's in the room and where we can delve deeper in, or where we should stay a higher level. Who here is not in a technical role at your job? Almost everybody, perfect. And so what, are you guys, we have like PMs in the room, is that? Yeah, a lot of PMs, great. I think this is going to be perfect for you guys. And managers and executives, you kind of guys? Great. Anybody technical? Leave. No, just kidding. I hope that you'll get something out of this too. We won't talk deep about the technical, but as a technical resource myself, I'm only that much more valuable with my soft skills and being able to help people drive these projects, because sometimes people don't have the in-house expertise to do this anyway. Who here has thought about or has actually applied SharePoint to address risks within their organization? Whatever that means to you. We're going to talk about what I think it means, but a few of you have. And of you guys, who's found it to be, has it been easy, or has it been, raise your hand if it's been a challenge. And then keep your hand up if that challenge was it a technical challenge? Or was it a sort of cultural and process challenge? Some of that, right? That's what I've found too. I've found that it's largely a process problem. One last quick survey. I had a baby 4 weeks ago, so my wife's at home with our 2 crazy kids. Thank you. You guys go ahead and fill out your evals right now. And so my wife's at home, and I'm in Vegas working. So would you say that I'm a dedicated technologist, horrible husband, or never leaving the house again? All of the above is right. You get the book. So why did we put this presentation together? This is actually a presentation that I was asked to put together by Microsoft. So I think they saw a real need for it versus me pitching it to them. When you talk about risk and information management in your companies, it's sort of, these are nebulous concepts. So putting some definition around them is going to sort of allow us to approach those things with clarity and purpose when we start to do that in our organizations. I think everybody knows how important it is to address risk, but a lot of people fail to take action, and we'll talk a little bit about that more. And when I think about that, I kind of think it's almost like losing weight, right? Like, I know I should probably lose 10 pounds. I know how to do it, and I just fail to do it. And sometimes you just need a personal trainer or something to inspire you and give you a structure. So today I'll be your personal trainer for risk management. No matter where you work, every company is facing this. Every company has exposure to risk, whether they know it or not. And we're going to talk more about hidden risks in just a little bit. One of the most exciting things is that the same things that you apply to address risk management are going to open the doors for big opportunities, drive revenue, promote ideation, and things like that. And this is really the main driver for this presentation, is that it can be really tough to get these projects done and get through the gridlock. And those of you who've already tried this have probably already found that. So there have been a lot of killer technical presentations all week that you guys may or may not have seen about governance and compliance and risk management. But this one's more about, once I know what this is and what the risks are, how do I approach it? How do I get people to listen to me? How do I avoid the gridlock? And I'm going to try to give you the tools that you need to drive that conversation in your organization. So this is not a technical conversation. It's really, in a way, it's sort of version, like SharePoint version agnostic. So if you have 2007 even, that's going to be fine, although the examples that we'll look at here are in 2013. So the agenda is going to be, we're going to define these things. What's information management? What are the types of organizational risks so that you can try to identify them? We're going to look at an example or two, and then we're going to talk about those opportunities that get opened up by applying some of these tools. Once we have it defined, we're going to talk about how do we apply this. So I'm going to provide a framework that you can use to try to get from the start to the finish line. And then we're going to talk about some of those challenges that we already alluded to, and then some considerations. And then last, we'll wrap up and talk about the key takeaways, some other places that you can look for information, and hopefully we'll have some question and answer. So what is information management? As I've been here at this conference and sort of trolling the exhibit floor, I've probably picked up about 300 of these little USB keys. And this one I put my presentation on, and I had to make some room on my computer, so I actually moved a couple hundred files on there too. So when I'm thinking about information management, sometimes I think the details and trappings of a big organization can kind of muddy the waters. And I think that the USB key was sort of a good metaphor for me. So I have all this information on here, and what do I want to do with it? I mean, I want to be able to find my files, so we're kind of talking about search. I may need to filter them by date or by the author, so now we need metadata and things like that to do that. I might need a naming convention or a folder structure, so we're getting into sort of information architecture. And I need to keep it safe, so I might password protect it, put some security on there. And I need it to be available, right? What happens if I leave it in my other pants? I need some disaster recovery. So that sounds a whole lot to me the way our organizations work, but without some of the people there to muddy it up. So when we talk about information management, it's these things. It's the metadata, search, security that we're talking about. And there's sort of going to be a theme through this talk that's that it's crucial to stay high level, right? And this can be a good sort of little reminder. So if I was starting a new project, I think addressing risk management, I'd probably tape this up in my office and look at it every time I want to remember it, because this is really your organization just without all the annoying people in it, right? So if we cash in our metaphor and start talking about information management where we work, we'll still start very high level, right? We all have data, and it just does a few things. It can come in, it goes out, it can grow, people can add more content, and it can rest. And that's really it, right? I mean, we're talking super high level. But again, we want to keep coming back to high level because you're going to see that the biggest problems that I see in doing these projects is getting sort of mired in the details too early, or at the wrong time anyway. So this is the business view. So we all want to do the same things with this information, right? We want to be able to react to them. We want to be able to proact. Yes, I know proact is not a word, but I have the microphone, so for an hour it's a word. We want to be able to find that information. We want to be able to keep it safe, and we want to be able to rely on it too. Microsoft is pretty fond of creating acronyms for stuff, so I gave this one a shot. It's RIP FISR. It was sort of unfortunate that I didn't end up with any vowels, but I stand by the buckets that I put here, and I would challenge you to think of something that doesn't fall in there, although if you do, I would appreciate if it was a vowel. So what am I talking about? To react to your information, consider maybe if you had a daily feed of sales reports, and you realize that there's a huge uptick in sales, and you need to make sure that you can support all those sales, right? So you can react to something that you see. A proactive example would be maybe you have a trend that gets surfaced on like an executive dashboard, and you see that for some reason every summer all of your project timelines start to slip. So you can sort of be proactive and work with your managers and say, hey, the summer's coming up, we know this happens, let's figure out why, or add staff or whatever that is. You could also use metadata and search to bubble up the right information to the right person at the right time, with, sort of automate that in a proactive way. The find part is kind of obvious. You need to find the information you need immediately, but we're not just talking about documents. There's people and expertise, and even information about projects, so we're not doing rework and reinventing the wheel. And then we want to be able to rely on our data. So I want to know that I can always find and make actionable decisions around my data. And so in this context, I'm talking really about metadata. I need my metadata to be applied consistently and hopefully automatically, and so that I know that I can run rules against it and all those sort of things, and it's 100% consistent. So this is really our really high-level functional spec. So if those were our requirements, let's talk about what our tool set is. We really have policies, or today we're going to be talking about policies, metadata, and search. Does anybody think we're missing anything from here? I can think of a few things that we could have added. Information architecture, security, process. Those things could all be in here for sure. I whittled it down to this, partly to fit it into the time that we have, but also those things sort of are applicable to just about every project that you're going to do with the SharePoint, whereas some of these things people may not even use if they're just using SharePoint as a document repository or just something like that. So let's talk a little bit about what each of these things are. Policies are a set of rules that apply to a particular type of content. So it helps organizations comply with legal or government regulations or internal business rules, things like that. And out of the box, you really just get retention. So what are we going to do with the document after a certain period of time? You have auditing, so we can create logs based on how our employees have interacted with the data. Labels, which get applied so that any physical copy of the document can be easily identified. You have barcodes, which are really just the same thing, but you can scan them. And then there are custom ones and add-ons. So things like disabling the ability to print a document would be something like an add-on or a custom. With metadata, I'm largely talking about managed metadata. Do you guys know what that is? Managed metadata service? It's not hugely important for this, but it's a way that you can create taxonomies and hierarchical data and sort of push it out across your enterprise and apply them to lists as metadata and stuff like that. So, but it's really talking about metadata, content types, and document sets. And then there's search. So search is kind of obvious again. But for those who aren't deep into search, I'm kind of a search guy, so I could talk about search all day. But you really have regular keyword search, just like you have on the internet. You have advanced features, like entity extraction and all sorts of crazy things you can do. And then something that's sort of gained more attention recently, search-based applications. So search, I feel like, has gotten more important, more crucial than ever, because we're able to sort of store more data. And the tools have just gotten better. So I feel like people are just giving it more attention. But we've just got too much information to have to know where it is. So you need to be able to just surface that in search. And the reality is that we live in a search world right now. If I asked any one of you a question right now and you didn't know the answer, the first thing you would do is pull out your Windows phone and do a Bing search. And so people would do the same thing in your organization if your search actually worked. But most companies, your search doesn't actually work. So sometimes if we're trying to define something, it's important to talk about what it's not. So information management is not a list of features. And nothing that looks like this is going to tell you what information management is, and it's not going to help you tell your organization what information management is. And by the way, presentations about stuff like this are super boring and abstract, in my opinion. And I just bring that up because you are likely going to be the ones that are presenting this to your CEOs and to your business users. So it's important to remember, don't show anybody a list of features. You need to show them applied solutions. So if that stuff's boring, what's not boring is being able to react to market data like we talked about, or being able to start a new project and get an immediate head start by surfacing all the research and information that all your colleagues across the world have done already, or data being surfaced to the right person at the right time. That stuff is sort of exciting, and that's what's going to get you attention and get buy-in for your project. So if we kind of talked about our functional spec and then our tool set, we're sort of getting closer, but what we really need to do is see this sort of combined view. So when we talk about being able to react, we sort of overlay our tool set on our goals, and we talk about being able to react. The tools that we're going to use are going to be metadata. To be able to be proactive, you're going to do things like add automatic policies. You could also add metadata and search. So, for instance, you could use search to send an alert if a certain things are found while you're crawling, and so that being proactive like that. Search, again, is an obvious one that involves search, but definitely metadata. If you guys haven't dug into what enterprise search is now, in SharePoint. You can use any type of your metadata to sort your results, to filter on them, and host of other things. We need to be able to keep it safe, and for that, we're going to apply policies. And typically, metadata is going to drive those policies. And we need to be able to rely on them. And I already sort of talked about that. Metadata is really the fuel that drives automation, search, surfacing of data. And that's sort of a theme throughout here. So you see the obvious trend here. Metadata is important for all of these things. So this is starting to give us a better view, right? And we looked at our functional spec and our tool set, and now we kind of see how they get applied together. So let's talk a little bit about what types of organizational risks there are. So, I mean, somebody slipping and falling in your parking lot is an organizational risk, but SharePoint can't do that. Can't address that yet. So let's start with the obvious thing. We have audits, compliance, and data security. So with audits, you're talking about the ability to provide requested data in a timely manner. And so if you have your data organized, well tagged, and you can be found, and you have an audit trail, you're going to save yourself a lot of money because, as you probably know, legal is just ridiculously expensive. So you need to be able to streamline that process. Compliance, again, it's another obvious one. And depending on what sector you guys are working in, it's probably something you deal with on a daily basis. And then you might have your own internal processes as well. But this is a huge exposure, and it's sort of obvious. So to give a recent example from the healthcare world, Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Tennessee was fined by HIPAA for $1.5 million for some sort of compliance failure. And only after that did they start to apply some of these things to address that risk. So you don't want to get there, right? You want to address these things before they bite you, and you need to proact, to use my word. And then security leaks. Security leaks are obviously important. There's a limit on what you can do here in SharePoint, right? Because you can prevent somebody from printing a document, emailing it, things like that. But I guess you could always take a picture of your monitor and walk out the door. So that's usually something that's in conjunction with your building security and cameras and all sorts of that stuff. But there are some things that you can do in SharePoint. So that was an obvious stuff. There's some not so obvious stuff. So this is sort of the biggest bucket in my mind. And some of these can be a little bit harder to quantify, but certainly there's no less risk, and it's not an excuse to avoid addressing them. So some of these things, I think they look a little fluffy, but if you think that they won't sink a business, you're wrong, especially when your competitors are able to address these things. Now, I kind of went a little crazy with this slide and put a lot of things. So what you're going to have to do when you do these projects is to cherry pick the ones that speak to your audience the best, which are the ones that apply to the person that you're talking to. But to pick just a few to talk about, inefficiencies. So if you've got something that I tend to see a lot is information workers performing a lot of tedious manual tasks that could otherwise be automated. And then the users could spend more time on their core job function instead of messing around with an Excel spreadsheet or manually applying metadata or whatever they're doing, emailing and printing stuff out. And again, metadata is going to be the fuel that drives that engine. Poor findability, it's not sort of just the obvious point, which is that it takes time to go and look for something, but the amount of rework that gets done in organizations that can't see across their enterprise and see into their global data is just crippling. So you have people reinventing the wheel and performing work twice. You can't find an expert when you need them. And on a large scale, it's just devastating to productivity. And I see it a lot with enterprise customers. We talk a little bit about loss of competitive edge with customers a lot. And that one, it can sound fluffy, but the failure, for instance, to get up-to-the-minute info and retain your IP and enable collaboration, ideation, things like that, those really will sink you, again, especially if your competitors are more agile. There's often an inability to react swiftly when your information isn't managed properly. So if you don't have the means to surface and visualize critical data, then you can't react to it. And the frustrated information workers, I mean, we're all here at this conference trying to better ourselves. I doubt there's a lazy person in this room. But tell me if you agree with this. I don't mind working really hard, but if I don't have the tools to do my job and I find myself sort of needlessly going against the grain, I get pretty cranky. And it's something I see a lot. People just sort of, it's almost like a morale killer, and people sort of give up on the organization. So you want to give your information workers the tools that they need to do their job, and I think that they'll reward you for it. And to pick another one, ill-informed decisions. We don't always have the luxury of doing a whole bunch of research to make decisions. Sometimes they just need to be made now, and if you don't have the information, then you have to make the decision based on what's there. You have a question? Oh, intellectual property. Oh, yes, the question is, what's IP? So I talked about hidden risks at the beginning of the presentation. I guess the obvious question is, how do I protect myself from a risk that I don't know about? And no, SharePoint doesn't have a Ouija board feature yet. But there are things, as a consultant, that I hear a lot, sort of like common themes. One of them sounds something like this. We know we have a bunch of data out there living in file shares, and they don't really have an owner, and we know that's not good. And they're telling me that. Does anybody have something like that in their organization? Yeah, a lot of hands. They're telling me that because they know that it's not good, but they don't know how that's going to bite them in the rear, but it really could. I can give you one real-world example. I was brought into a very big company that you guys have all heard of. I'm going to protect them, but a big company that you've all heard of, and they make products that you probably use every day. And they had I think I have a little infographic to go with this. This is the company, if that helps. They had a competitor on the other side of the country who had a patent, and they haven't utilized it to create a product or anything, and it was getting ready to expire. So the company that I ended up working with poured a whole bunch of money in research and time and effort to position themselves to take advantage when that patent expired. And they stood to make a lot of money if they could get this product out there. So when they were doing their research, they had a known issue. Their enterprise search just stunk. And they were in that position where the information workers had given up on using search. So some of their data that they were trying to search on that they had internally was also exposed to the internet, and they were using Google to search for that information. The other company that held the patent used Google Analytics and noticed that there were a whole lot of queries coming from this little tiny town in New Jersey that's really just known for this first company about that patent. And so they saw that coming, and they renewed the patent. And Company A lost a ton of money and time and effort. And that's why I ended up with them, because at that point, their CEO said, hey, IT, it's time to get our stuff together, and we need a real enterprise search solution. We need to manage our information a little bit better. Another way, I guess, of looking at it is our organizational risks are the inability to do our functional specs, right? We can't accomplish our goals. So we're going to do a quick little demo here. So hopefully you won't have to deal with this in your career, but sometimes you get sued, and you need to be ready for it. So what this demo is going to show, it's going to show all three of all three of the facets of our tool set. So we're going to be looking at a policy, some metadata, and search to accomplish something very specific. We're also going to, as a sort of byproduct, going to get to see the new e-discovery template in SharePoint 2013, which can facilitate the process, but it's still the information management that makes this possible. So in this demo, I'm a handsome middle-aged man called Garth Fort, and I work for Contoso, and I'm in IT. So I own the SharePoint environment. And legal's contacted me, and they said, hey, we need to provide all of the documents that relate to the Jameson account. And they also need to know who has accessed that information within the month of November, and what they did with it. And so we had to do this earlier in the year, so I've been through it before, and I know that everything that I give to legal, hired lawyers are going to have to go through them. So it's critical that I only give them the necessary information, or else we leave a lot of money on the table, or spend a lot of money that we didn't need to. And again, legal is just insanely expensive. Let me switch over here. So this is, I'm Garth again, and I've gone to my new e-discovery center in SharePoint, and I'm going to create a new case called Jameson. Let's say. Have you guys already seen the e-discovery template? No? Do we know what e-discovery is? Not so much. So e-discovery is the process of basically, if a request like this comes in, you need to find all the data that applies to whatever legal matter is happening. Typically, you need to put a hold on that data so that you have a sort of snapshot of it in time. And then you need to, of that data that you put a hold on, you need to sort of whittle it down to just the really important stuff, and then that gets sent in a sort of standardized format to a legal team who will then scour the documents. It's incredibly expensive. I mean, the typical e-discovery process in a large organization could be like $1 million. So in this case, we're going to start by doing this hold. So I want to identify sort of the big swath of information so that I can put a hold on it. So Jameson hold info. And to get that sort of that data in broad strokes, I'm just going to do a search basically for Jameson. And I'm going to search my whole site, right? So SharePoint.com. And thank you. Okay, so I can see I found 26 megs of data, 109 documents. I'm going to enable an in-place hold and apply the filter. I'm going to save this. So now what that means is this hold has been put on that data. If somebody makes a change to one of those documents, it sort of gets shadow copied in a way, and so that we can retain that sort of snapshot in time. The second thing I need to do, and what's pertinent right now, is find the data that I need to export to give to the lawyers. And so this needs to be a little bit more specific, right? Jameson export, I'll call it. So if I do a search for Jameson and search, I can see I got that 109 documents at 26 megs again. And so that has a price tag on it. Now, at Contoso, we have an automated process, so when anybody adds a new document, it automatically discovers who the client is based on some business rules, where the document was uploaded, and we can even use search to discover what's inside the document and automatically tag it in case we missed it. So I know that that's pretty accurate. And I know just a little bit about search, enough to know that I can say, I can search on a specific property. Customer equals Jameson. And so we're going to see this get whittled down to 41 documents and 18 megs. Big deal. I just saved us an enormous amount of money in just a matter of seconds. And I was only able to do it because we had a proper search engine in place and because we had a metadata strategy that allowed me to search on that specific property. Now, I made this simple, and we only had a little bit, tiny bit of data, but imagine your enterprise now, or your company now, and the types of things that you could search on, and the amount of data that may surface if somebody asked about one account or something like that. Literally, you could save yourselves hundreds and hundreds of $1,000s in seconds if you put the time proactively to put these things in place. So that's the first half. Good day so far. I just saved our company a lot of money. The second thing that I was tasked with was discovering who has accessed this information. So I'm going to go to our home site. Now, being a good administrator and knowing that these things come up from time to time, I've turned on the auditing policy. So what I can do is go into my site settings. I'll just actually show you. So I can pull up a log report. And since I had already turned on auditing, I can make a custom report. And I'll save it wherever, documents. You could restrict it to a particular location, which I'm not going to do. You could do it a particular time. I won't do that for now. Even to particular users. Sometimes the lawsuit's about a particular person, or maybe you had somebody leave your company and you think maybe they stole some contacts or something like that. You could kind of figure that out using this. But I just want to see who's opened a document, who did anything with the document. And then I can view it right away, and it gives me a little summary report. And then if I go over to this other side, I can see this guy, Paul Olenek, updated a number of documents a few days ago. And so I can send this along to my legal team. It's in Excel, so I can filter it by different things to a particular location, type of document, stuff like that. So that's not the sexiest demo in the world. I mean, it sort of feels like a little bit like who cares, but again, legal is hugely expensive. I was able to save the company a ton of money by just doing a little bit of configuration up front and making sure I had a metadata strategy in place and turned on auditing. And it was only easy because I had done that, right? Question?
Just to clarify, the demo that you did really only applies to 2013 enterprise, is that correct?
The question is, does the demo I just did only apply to enterprise? I don't know the licensing details on that. And is it true because it's the e-discovery template?
Yeah, this is enterprise.
So the answer is yes. But But I guess for this specific example, yes. But I guess the overall point is these features that are there get activated by the work that you do up front to sort of make them work. Yes? So the question is, did they ask for who has access to the document or who has accessed it? I may have had a typo. For me, it was who has accessed it. There is a way to see who has access to it now. Yes. Yep, there's basically everything you can think of: a copy, a delete, a move, a view, an edit. So here's another example. Sometimes you're dealing with data that doesn't even reside in SharePoint. So if you remember the story I told you earlier about the company that lost out on that patent and left a lot of money on the table, when we actually got on the ground there, this is what we found. They had data in silos. So they had a bunch of different systems with different data. And those things were related, very related, logically, but they weren't related technically. There was no technical way to piece those things together. And you're going to see what I mean in a minute. So specifically, they didn't know, they create some products like, pills and things like that. They didn't know which ingredients and formulas and products went together unless they went to the owners of each of those things and just asked them. So think of an example or a use case like a recall. One of our ingredients is tainted. We need to get it off the shelves. And we need to do it immediately because people's health is at risk. If you can't actually relate all those things together, which seems ridiculous, but it's actually how it was, you just have to pull everything. So that can be billions of dollars in losses, right? You're taking all of your stuff off the shelves, and maybe you only needed to do it in one small location or one product or whatever it is. So we're talking about huge exposure, huge consequences, huge risks. So this is sort of what it looked like. They had their products and formulations and ingredients all in separate applications. This is something that we see a lot, and when people try to search against it, they basically search against each system separately, and they may have built-in search, and they may vary in how well you can search or how granularly you can search and stuff like that. So what we did was, while we were crawling, related that information together so that by the time that it got into the index, we had a sort of related, one related record that had all of that information together. And it's a unique record that doesn't exist anywhere else in the organization. And I don't want to get too deep here, but this is some of the advanced search features that I was talking about, that I alluded to in the beginning. This is like something you could do with Fast Search for SharePoint or with the current version of SharePoint 2013. And it's we call it like content processing. So search is not just about finding and reaction, but it's also about understanding, right? Being able to visualize your data and understand how these things fit together. And it's a very cognitive human process. And it's essential to decision making and in turn, like reactionable insight. When we actually built this POC and showed it to the VP who had requested it, he almost fell out of his chair because he instantly recognized how much money they're going to save and what a huge glaring risk we just mitigated. And truly it's going to save them millions of dollars. So that was sort of an example of, one, using search in a sort of information management way, and also how you might apply some of these things to data that resides outside of SharePoint. But once it gets in there, in this case, in the index, we can apply those things. So I mentioned in the beginning that The same tools that we use to mitigate risk can also drive opportunity. And this is important because, well, for a number of reasons, but when you're trying to build buy-in in your organization, risk management and information management, people's eyes sort of glaze over. But when you talk about opportunities, driving revenue, ideation, and stuff like that, people's ears start to perk up, and in a way it can sort of be your back door into getting your risk mitigation done. So this is where you can kind of make it sound sexier to your business. So some common examples are ideation, being able to create new products faster. Like we saw in the last example, being able to identify relationships that you weren't able to see before and gaining new insights. So let's stay with that last example. Now they have this great search tool and they can keep the product on the shelf. They can find their experts easier, so that's better ideation. They can also find the existing and parallel research, so they're not doing the duplicate work. And all these speak to quicker time to market, right? The idea of like ideation, again, to some people sounds fluffy, but if you're talking to your CEO, I mean, one good idea is worth everything. So the more people that you can pull into the fold, the more information that I can get access to and surface in my search results, the better chance we have of doing that. So that also speaks to the quicker time to market. Differentiation, this is something that comes up for organizations that provide extranets sometimes, right? So we have a differentiation in that we provide this, we're a law firm and we provide an extranet and it's got killer search. We have this entity extraction process and everything gets logged and it's just sort of a selling point. And this, I guess it speaks to the quicker time to market, is getting visibility across your teams, leveraging existing IP and knowledge. So a couple of real-world examples. One is the one that we just saw, which is creating this unique record in search. These are real-world examples that I was part of. We've done a number of executive dashboards that were only possible because we had the right metadata being filtered in so that we could surface all this information. And that's something that enables them to see across all their projects and see how things are doing. For the second bullet, it could be anything. Some of the things that we've done have been project management, so they can see if they're hitting their goals. And then things like workflows and approval workflows and stuff like that. Again, it's just important that your metadata exists and that it's applied consistently. So I mentioned in the beginning, we'll sort of talk a little bit about a framework of how you can drive these processes. So we start with the foundation. You need to stay out of the weeds in the beginning. I've seen a lot of projects fail because they sort of get into the nitty-gritty of either the technical details or the details of, say, a policy or something like that up front. So you want to keep the conversation very business level until it needs to go deeper, and then continue to check back on here. Everything you do should have a specific outcome in mind. So one thing I see a lot is I'll go to organizations and maybe they're reacting to something bad that happened. They had a compliance problem. So now they said, we're going to go crazy. We're going to make all these changes now, and we're going to apply metadata. And they create a spreadsheet, and it's got 8,000 columns and anything that they can think of. Especially with metadata, you want to really only be asking your users, or even if you're automating it, asking your developers to create things that have a very specific purpose. So I would just caution you not to go crazy with the metadata. You kind of need to know who you're talking to, and we talked about this or alluded to it a little bit earlier. The things that you say to your CEO to get them excited about this and get your project greenlighted are much different than the things that you're going to say to the business users. And you want to sort of have that in mind and have your different scripts so that everybody is on board. sometimes these things can touch tricky areas that maybe aren't already defined. You want to start with the easy stuff and find the easy consensus and build from there. So you don't want to start in the beginning and have 3 days of conversation about can people curse in emails, or I don't know, something like that. And the last thing is you're just going to want to refer to those high-level goals all the time, right? Because you're going to find yourself being dragged into the mud, the details. Keep referring back to those top-level goals. So that's our foundation. So for the framework is sort of to do it in this order and build from here. So you're going to identify and quantify your risks. So this is putting them in the buckets that we defined earlier. Are they audits? Are they hidden risks? Are they productivity leaks, something like that? And then we're going to want to quantify them. And as much as possible, when I say quantify them, we want to end up with like a dollar amount or an effort amount. We're going to want to do both of those same things, identify and quantify the opportunities now, right? So this is going to help us sell this internally. This is really where you're going to get the attention of your business, I think. And it's sort of the sexy stuff that drives revenue and improves business instead of impeding it. You're going to have to figure out what is the project going to look like. So you're going to work with your SharePoint gurus and your third-party partners or your internal guys and gals to understand, is it out of the box? Does it require a purchase? Is it big or is it little? And what types of resources are we going to need? Do that up front. Don't pitch the idea of fixing a solution and then figure out together with the people you're pitching to how much it's going to cost. You want to come in the beginning with that work done. And then you need to build your buy-in. So this is a battle, like I mentioned, it's going to be kind of fought on multiple fronts. So you're going to have your story for your business users, for your CEO, for IT, and create your buy-in that way. And now I'll pause so you can see my clouds. I like PowerPoint. So to just drill into those, we already know what we mean by categorize. Quantify, again, we want that to boil it down to a dollar amount. So let's be clear, I've said it a million times, but the best way to get buy-in for anything in your organization is going to be about the dollars and cents to the business. So don't show IT how great it is. Don't talk too much about TCO and things like that. We want to talk like revenue and costly exposure, and that's going to get the attention you want. So things like the cost of lawyers, what happens if our stock goes down, losing clients to competitors, downtime, all of those are the risks that have an impact on our bottom line, and you're going to want to talk about that. So sometimes you are not going to have the info you need to come up with your quantitative analysis, and you're going to have to lean on a lot of other people. So go buy somebody in the purchasing department a beer and ask them all about how much different things cost. Talk to your managers and directors who are responsible for budget. You really need to know how much people are spending on certain things and how much money is allotted for different things. And in terms of a framework, I was really hoping to kind of come up with, this is how you quantify a dollar amount. It's really hard to do that unless you have all the specific details. But one trick that I've used is if I'm having trouble doing this, I'll find a good endpoint. So I'll find somebody that's already done something similar and look at the output and then try to work backwards from there. So then I kind of figure out all the different things that I need to come up with. And then we want to identify our opportunities. And we remember now this is the big sell. And it's easier to sell this than to fight about the importance of risk management. One thing to point out is that a trick you can use is that sometimes these are just your risks phrased differently. So that can be helpful from a conversation kind of sales point of view. When you quantify, again, you're going to want to use real numbers. And again, get your costs and options up front. how many people need to be involved. And it's better to have this up front because then you can craft the story and present it all at once. So in terms of building buy-in, again, there's going to be a lot of things that are hard to agree on, like company policies. Things like that are tough, so you're going to save those for later. So things like the quick response to an audit, that's really easy to build consensus on. So you can start with things like that. You want to paint like real or hypothetical scenarios. So build out some use cases, and you can kind of pull it from the headlines. Like I mentioned, the HIPAA situation with Blue Cross, and you can say something like, X competitor just got slammed with a huge fine over a compliance issue, and the reason it happened was because they didn't have their metadata applied correctly, and it cost them $8 million. And they could have invested 50 up front to develop a couple of tools and apply search, and it never would have happened. I've seen many times where we go in to sort of sell enterprise search in an organization, and IT is balking about the price tag, whatever it is, $250,000 to apply it and purchase all the license and everything. And that sounds like a lot of money, but all of a sudden that seems negligible if you can solve a $8 million a year problem with it. So that's a really important kind of technique to use, to tie something that feels like a broad platform thing and apply it to a very specific problem. So what are the challenges that you might face? I mentioned in the beginning, the challenges are typically going to be conceptual and not technical. That's not to say you're not going to have any technical problem, but that's not what's specifically hard about this type of endeavor. The kind of pushback I see are fear of impeding business. So your business users may say something like, gosh, if we have so many controls in place and so much governance, we can't do business, and we need to work the way that we work, and then IT needs to figure out the mess. That's one of the reasons that you can't just work with IT, and you need to get the business groups to partner with you. There is a fear of automation that I see a lot, and I think people feel like they're going to lose control. And I think we all here at a technology conference know that human error is probably a lot more likely an outcome than a workflow going rogue. And something that we'll do sometimes is just a quick POC. So if you have somebody they don't want to give up their little spreadsheet that they labor over every day, something that could be automated, do like a quick POC, like a day, nothing crazy, and show them how their workday can be a little bit better, and that can really turn somebody around. So if they're tagging stuff or managing an Excel spreadsheet, something kind of easy to address with SharePoint, try that. Getting into the weeds and failing to gain consensus, we kind of already talked about that. You want to start with the stuff that's easy to get consensus. And also important to remember that's not really part of your applying the project. All of those little details that everybody's going to argue about and sit in a conference room all day, those are the requirements. And you need to tell them to figure it out, but just like any project, you need your requirements before you start building something. And the last is understanding how to quantify risk. And I talked about one little technique just in terms of taking a shortcut by looking at a good endpoint and rebuilding that risk. But you're going to likely be leaning on other people in your organization for information to kind of build out your use cases. So to wrap up, the key takeaways here are we need to stay business focused. If we get too into the technical and start arguing about which technology to apply to fix these things, or the nitty-gritty and details about which policies we're going to apply and why, the project could fail very easily. Focus on the opportunity and revenue, which can be just the flip side of your risk. And it's going to get a different type of attention, and it's going to get the ear of your CEO and C-level executives. Metadata is the fuel that drives automation search. and surfacing of info. I mean, sort of just a quick side note. I didn't want to get technical at all here, but I would consider looking into a auto tagging tool if you're talking about if this is going to be important to you, and I think it should be probably, that metadata is going to be involved with helping you mitigate risk. The way to do that uniformly and properly without burdening your users is to have an auto tagging tool. Yes. What would I recommend? So there are a lot of partners who have auto tagging tools. The ones that I've worked with are there's one by BA Insight, and which is the one, Concept Searching. Both of those guys have booths here. I don't know if they're still here, but and there are a number of others, but those are good. And I've worked with a couple of companies that built something in-house, and it worked just nicely. And the last thing is just to remember that the challenges that you're going to face will likely be organizational, not technical. So be prepared for that right battle. You don't have to go crazy doing tons of research about the tools. You can lean on your technology partners, in-house or otherwise, for that. What you need to do is get your ducks in a row with the business. So some of the places you can find out more about these types of projects. So TechNet, even though it's largely very technical, there's plenty of high-level info there. Usually there will be a how-to document, and then there will be a planning document along with it. So if you go and do a Bing search for information management, you'll see that. You'll see, how do I apply information management policies? How do I plan for them? And if you look at the planning side of it, there'll be plenty of not super technical information. There's also non-SharePoint resources, just platform agnostic. I actually was not aware of this website until I was putting together this presentation, but informationmanagement.com. There's a whole subculture of nerds that are interested in just information management. And then everybody here, I believe, is going to get access to all the sessions that were recorded this week. So I listed out a number of sessions that touched on things that we're talking about. Some of these are technical. The customer showcase is probably one that would be interesting to you, because I imagine they'll talk about the whole process and not just the technical. But the four gentlemen that I list on here are group, some of my SharePoint heroes that I follow their blogs and get in touch with them when I need more info or inspiration. Here's my contact info. Feel free to get in touch if you have more questions about this or other things, SharePoint and search or anything really. Does anybody have any questions right now that you'd like to address? Next question gets a free book. Or does somebody want to share an experience that they had that around this? Especially having what? Right. So the question is, where do document IDs come into play in risk management? One gently used book is available. In terms of managing risk, so first, what is a unique document ID? That's something that was a construct that was new in SharePoint 2010. And documents got an ID that was applied to it, and it remained no matter where you copied it, so you could follow around a document. So, collection to collection. Oh, so you're talking about like a gap. Let's talk about it after. That starts to get pretty technical, but yeah. You can still have the book, though. Any others? Yes?
I have a little story about a project we're working on.
Yes, please share.
In Los Angeles, there were a very large series of publications in the Los Angeles Times. So I talked to the Times reporter and I asked him, where'd you get all the information about the articles? They said they sequestered 7,000 emails from the district, and put together the article. So I said to them, wow, you must have an amazing knowledge management system to filter out all that information in those email trails. And they looked at me and they said, what are you talking about? We were up all night reading emails for months. And my point is, when you read the articles, they really didn't have a good understanding of what the process had taken place over the project by extracting the information. They were able to get all that information based on the Freedom of Information Act because it's a public funded project. So
Wow.
I'm just curious about some comments you might make about not necessarily legal proceedings, but how media actually extracts information from organizations, constructs stories, and then publishes those stories that aren't really factual.
So, sorry, some of it got garbled. Which is the question part? Is it how do you extract data from media?
How media takes information and then creates their own story that really isn't conducive to the information that was delivered to them.
I don't know how exactly. Come talk to me afterwards, because I'd like to talk about that more, but I don't have a strong answer there. Anyone else? Okay, guys, thank you. I hope you enjoyed SBC. Please have a safe trip home, and feel free to get in contact anytime. I'm supposed to tell you to evaluate my session, and they said that it should all be high scores.